Welcome to the TFD Hockey Show, the first episode. If you're wondering why this is a thing, well, none of my co-hosts on our podcast would film with me. They were all so busy that they couldn't film. And in today's video, we are going to be by ourselves, I guess. I don't know how often this is going to be. I'm going to assume every single week something like this is going to happen, where we just talk about hockey, talk about everything that's going on in the NHL world. We will have a main theme to the show, and today's episode, as you guys can see, we are ranking the last 10 NHL finals. This is obviously my personal list, but before we do that, we have to talk about some news in the NHL. But before we start, make sure you guys like and subscribe. Maybe this is better than the podcast, I don't really know. You guys gotta let me know how you feel about this episode. Let me know if I should just quit doing this, just stick to the NHL rebuilds and stuff, or should I, maybe consider making this a professional-ish show, grabbing a camera, grabbing a better microphone, and just trying to start all this stuff, you know what I'm saying? But without further ado, let's get into the episode. First thing we have to talk about is some news around the NHL, obviously starting with a guy out in Tampa, one of the best Tampa Bay, or not best, but one of the most important Tampa Bay players of all time, Yanni Gourde. And I know that's crazy to say, but this dude has, 3 Stanley Cups to his name, or 2 Stanley Cups, my fault. But he was an undrafted free agent, and he's definitely in the top, 20 players of all time in Lightning history, 25. Being a top 25 in a franchise, one of the most successful modern franchises, is pretty cool. I'm not gonna lie. So Yanni Gourde gets a 6-year extension, which will take him up to the year 39 of his career. So he is guaranteed to be playing hockey until he's 39, which is very nice to see. He takes $2.3 million. I guess to him it was important that he got, that next contract, and who knows, maybe in 6 years, 2.3 mil is going to be a minimum contract. You never really know how it's going to work here, but I think, I don't know how to feel, 6 years is a lot. At the same time, Tampa Bay Lightning, they're going for a cup, kind of have to do something like this, make sure they extend their cup window, and signing guys like Yanni Gourde to 2.3 mil opens up a lot of options for your team. So, hopefully with the extra cap space coming in through the CBA deal, and the fact that you're only paying your second line center $2.3 million, hopefully that encourages the Lightning to try and, spend more and capitalize on this last little window with Kucherov and Point and Hedman and all these guys. So it's going to be interesting to see how they utilize that money. But Yanni Gourde, 6 more years of guaranteed hockey, you got to respect it. Just shout out to him. Another thing we got to talk about, Jesper Fast has officially announced his retirement. So shout out Jesper Fast. I have it here, 700 games played in the NHL, which is, a pretty long career. I will say 10 seasons to be exact. He put up 91 goals and 248 points. Sorry, I'm not paying attention. But 248 points for Jesper Fast. A pretty good career. You will definitely take that if you're, dreaming of playing in the NHL, you know what I'm saying? So, I don't know. I really respect, what he did as an NHL player. He's obviously really nasty. But, shout out Jesper Fast. A great career, and hopefully, good luck in your retirement and having a great life, you know what I'm saying? And the last bit of news here, we have to talk about the Memorial Cup just packed up here in where was it? It was somewhere in Quebec, Moncton. That's where it was. So shout out to the Moncton Wildcats. I don't even think that's in Quebec, but you know what? They put on a great show. I really enjoyed the World Cup. The London Knights obviously won the World Cups, the Memorial Cup, sorry, my bad. Shout out Stu for the big save. But, yeah, the London Knights team, absolute juggernauts, obviously. I thought they were going to win when they were kind of in their prime a little bit more. still has a lot of the core pieces, and I mean, they are stacked. Easton Cowan, no joke, will go down as one of the best London Knights players that I've ever seen in my lifetime. I mean, he's obviously, you know, not an NHL level prospect as Mitch Marner, Patrick Kane, etc. You know what I mean? Rick Nash, he was a London Knight, I'm pretty sure. He's not that level of prospect, but in terms of their London Knights career, I mean, like, 56 game point streak, capping it off with a Memorial Cup, gonna go join the Toronto Maple Leafs. You know, he doesn't have to move too far. I think it was a pretty, you know, I'd say it's a really successful career from Easton Cowan, and I mean, you know, I think shout out the London Knights, man. And then we obviously have to talk about Medicine Hat, who just lost in the finals. You know, no glaze, but their goal scorer was Gavin McKenna. I know you guys probably heard so many people call this guy generational talent. Honestly, that could be a whole video in itself, whether I think Gavin McKenna is a generational talent or not. But you can't deny, I mean, in terms of his WHL, you know, career, you know, elite regular season player, offensive wise, you know what, he's actually very good defensively for an offensive minded prospect. You know, he's not elite by any means, but I mean, nobody's expecting him to be elite. And then, I mean, just like he rose in the playoffs, you know, like you can't do much better, obviously. Like, it's not like he got like whoa, this guy was a bum in the season, now he's good in the playoffs. Like, he was amazing in the season, amazing in the playoffs. And I mean, we'll see where he goes from here, whether he's going to college and all that stuff. You know, I think we'll find out more in the coming weeks. Nobody wants to rush him on his decision. He wants to make the right one for himself, and you know, for his draft case to go #1. But shout out to the Memorial Cup, overall great success, and shout out to the London Knights once again for winning. Okay, let's get into the main part of this episode, ranking the last 10 NHL finals. So this is my personal list, so you guys can get mad all you want. It is my opinion. This is based on, you know, how much fun I had watching these finals, how entertaining I thought they were. You know, a little bit is if the team I wanted to won the cup. Not really, because, like, you know, like, honestly, if it wasn't a Canadian team, I didn't really care who won. There's a couple of years where I kind of cared who won. You know, some storylines are important at the same time. Storylines are, you know, when you're ranking how good the finals was, I don't really care about the storyline. Like, I do. Like, it's sick, some of the storylines, but you'll see, like, I have more of an emphasis on how good the hockey was. But that's, you know, my criteria. I do really want to hear you guys' rankings in the comments, so let me know what you guys think. And I think we'll go in chronological order here. I think it just makes the most sense. You know, start with, oh my goodness, Adam Boqvist. That was crazy. Okay, so I've been going back and forth on what I think, you know, the worst finals of the past 10 years was. So 2015, and I'm including 2025 if you're wondering, you know, oh, 2015 is 9 years. Yeah, I'm including this year and stacking it up against the other finals to see where I would rank it. So yeah, I'm going with at 10, 2023. If you guys do not remember, that was the Vegas Golden Knights and the Florida Panthers. So why would I put this at number 10 when it was a pretty good finals? You know, it was two no-tax teams. It was Gary Bettman's favorite finals of all time. Why would I put it at number 10? Well, for one, the Florida Panthers, I don't know if you guys remember, they were the 8th seed. They were, you know, they're not the juggernaut they were now. They were a great playoff team, didn't have a great start to the regular season, and honestly, they were so much worse than they are right now. And they still made the finals, obviously. You know, they beat down on the greatest team, numbers-wise, in NHL history, you know, the best regular season record. They absolutely destroyed that team. And, I mean, like like I was excited to watch it. Like I watched, a lot of the games, but honestly, like sometimes I just felt like it was like kind of a waste of time to watch the games, if I'm being honest. Like, I'm watching it because it's the finals, but it wasn't like, I think all three of Florida's series before then were way more entertaining, maybe because they won, maybe that's the deciding factor. But even, Vegas, like when they played against the Oilers, I thought that was a lot more, entertaining of a series than the finals. And it was over in 5, you know what I'm saying? Like I understand that part. At the same time, it's a little bit like, I don't know. It's interesting because the Vegas Golden Knights were the one, like they were literally the team to beat. The Florida Panthers barely. It would be like if the Montreal Canadiens this year made the finals against the Dallas Stars or something, you know what I mean? Like against the Oilers or whatever. Like, yeah, it's a great story, but it like compared to the other Stanley Cup finals, it just wasn't like the best hockey, the best level of hockey in my personal opinion. Both teams were very good. I'm not saying that they like sucked or anything. I'm just saying that, like, I don't know, I just thought there were, like, every other finals had, maybe a more exciting, just level of hockey to it. At number 9, I have the 2021 Stanley Cup Finals. This was in the COVID year. It was in Montreal versus Tampa. Pretty sure Montreal won in 5 games, I'm pretty sure. We got the Nikita Kucherov quotes. We got some crazy drama leading up to it. The Montreal Canadiens, well, again, another team where they're not supposed to be there. And you guys might think I don't like seeing the underdogs. I really do. At the same time, when you're ranking against, all the other teams, all the other, series, it's like, it's just hard to judge, you know what I'm saying? But shout out Montreal. The only thing is, like, the only reason I considered putting the Florida team above, like the Florida series above it, is because I'm not gonna lie, that Montreal roster outside of Carey Price, it was basically like, if you have whoever the best goalie in the league you think is, if you have like Vasilevsky and like, a solid team, don't get me wrong, a very solid team, a team, very capable of making the playoffs, but in my opinion, they had made a miraculous run to the finals, and, shout out them. At the same time, I just think, the level was higher for a lot of these other, losing teams. And then in terms of the reason I have it over the 2023 series when they're eerily similar, I just think that the Tampa Bay Lightning, the winning team was so much better than the Vegas Golden Knights. Tampa Bay Lightning of that era, like of the 2 Stanley Cup era, might genuinely be the best team we ever see with our own eyes. Like, that team was amazing. Maybe this Florida Panthers team is up there, but like, if you think that this Florida team is good, maybe their star power is a bit better because the players in the league are a bit better. But at the same time, that Tampa team was like homegrown, developed from the ground up, just getting a bunch of, late round steals. It was like the right way to build a team. And also, they built such a good team while, they had Hedman, they had Stamkos, but, a lot of their core was just built from these depth draft picks, and that is why this series ranks higher, in my opinion, than 2023. Alright, next up, we have the 2016 Stanley Cup Finals coming in at 8 between the Pittsburgh Penguins and the San Jose Sharks. Now, you might think, this was the first cup, this was the Marc-Andre Fleury injury, this was the Matt Murray series, this was the Matt Murray playoffs. Like, the Sharks, they actually put up a really good fight. They had a really good team. They were a lot better than the other team that the Penguins beat. Well, in my personal opinion, from what I remember watching this series, I wasn't very old. I think I was 10 years old when this series happened. I don't was it 9? I think I was 9 years old, or 9 or 10, one of the two. And I don't know, like, this series was incredible. And if we're doing a tier list, this series is so much higher than the previous two. I just think when you compare it to some of the most legendary playoff series of all time, it doesn't stack up. I mean, it was a great 6 games. It was very competitive, very close, and I actually really think it's an underrated Stanley Cup Finals. There's a lot of good storylines. You know what I'm saying? Pete DeBoer losing. Where have we seen that one before? But at the end of the day, I don't really have an argument for, if you put it higher, I actually would very much agree with you. At the same time, in my personal list, I would put it lower. That's just, my opinion. Next up, we have another COVID championship here in 2020, coming in at number 7 between Tampa and the Dallas Stars. I think this series was much more entertaining than the 2021 Lightning win. These were two of the best teams in the league. Ben Bishop playing his former team. You had Jamie Benn, Tyler Seguin, who, 5 years ago, these were two of the, I don't know if you guys remember, but these were two of, the top guys in the Hart Trophy voting. Jamie Benn won an Art Ross Trophy, I'm pretty sure, 2015. And then you had the young guys like Robertson, Hintz, and all of them. And then you had the powerhouse Tampa Bay Lightning, who were always knocking on the door, just like the Leafs. They had made a finals before, and I mean they were looking hungry. They were looking very hungry, and it was an entertaining series. It sucked that there were no fans. I think that's one of the main things that drops it down for me. There were no fans, and it was actually very competitive. I kind of feel like I just feel like when I've watched it, I always kind of knew that Tampa was already winning, in my opinion. That's just kind of what I gauged from the series. But, I mean, Dallas put up a really competitive fight, and it was very good hockey, I will say. But, yeah, when you stack it up against these other finals, it comes in at number 7, which isn't a bad thing at all. Next up, at number 6, we have the 2018 Stanley Cup Finals. Now, I just said I don't really care about storylines as much as other people when we're doing this ranking, in my opinion. But there are some storylines that are too good to pass up, and when one of your favorite players of all time wins a Stanley Cup, I mean, one of the world's favorite players of all time, it's hard not to appreciate what's going on, the storylines, and just appreciate the moment. And Alex Ovechkin winning a cup is something that was well deserved, something that obviously never happened again. I don't know if it ever will. Washington, they're a great team. Who knows? We had, Ovechkin. How much legs does he have left in him? But he capitalized on his one chance. On the other side, it was an expansion team, the first ever expansion team in sports history to make the finals. Thought it was really great hockey. Some of the games weren't as competitive as maybe the Dallas series or the Pittsburgh San Jose series. But you know what? The storylines definitely drive this one up. And that Capitals team, in my opinion, is going to unfortunately go down so underratedly. That power play, I still remember that was the first time I saw, in my own eyes, a 1-3-1 ran to perfection. You had Backstrom on the half wall, obviously Ovechkin, TJ Oshie in the bumper. You had Kuznetsov cycling down. You had those 2 left-hand shots. You had John Carlson at the point. It was the picture-perfect power play. And I mean, that Vegas team, still one of the most fun teams in NHL history. But yeah, it's coming in at number 6. Because the level of hockey, maybe wasn't as great as some of the series ahead of it. speaking of, I think the only 7-game Stanley Cup Finals on this list is the 2019 Stanley Cup Finals, coming in at number 5. Number 5 is the 2019 Stanley Cup Finals between the St. Louis Blues and the Boston Bruins, a Game 7. Now you might be like, oh, well, there's 11 Cup Finals on this list if you're including 2025. You know, that's at the end where I would, place it. But yeah, I think at number 5, the 2019 Cup, I mean, that was a Game 7. Obviously, everybody loves a Game 7. Yeah, it was, the worst, one of the worst playoff teams, one of the more bad playoff teams. But those St. Louis Blues were on an absolute heater. Who knows if they would have done it in real life if they didn't get scored on with 1.6 seconds left. But, they had a rookie goalie. They had Ryan O'Reilly, Alex Pietrangelo, Vladimir Tarasenko. They had a team that was so fun to watch, so entertaining. And I just thought, it was a competitive 7-game series. Boston Bruins obviously, lost to the Blackhawks the last time they were in the finals, looking for another cup win. Unfortunately for Bergeron and Krejci and Marchand and that core, they never got one, obviously. But yeah, it was a great 7 games. 2 pretty evenly matched teams. Honestly, I would have thought Boston would have took it home, but honestly, I would have thought that any of the series that St. Louis Blues played in, they would have lost before. But they were just a hot team who caught fire and were absolutely nasty. I mean, if your series goes to Game 7, you're, pretty high up on this list. And for me, that is at number 5. So moving on to number 4, in my opinion, we had the tier of 2023 and 2021. Then these next, 2016, 2020, 2018, 2019 was like its own kind of tier. And then these 4, in my opinion, are on the big boy tier. So if the first 2 were C tier, the next 4 were B tier. The next 2, in my opinion, are A tier, starting with the 2017 Stanley Cup Finals, the second win for the Pittsburgh Penguins. Now, why is this so much higher than 2016, you ask, when the Nashville Predators were probably a worse team than San Jose Sharks? So I think that, first of all, to get to this point, it was the Ottawa Senators series. Chris Kunitz, I think it was double overtime, scored the winner. That Ottawa Senators team was crazy. I actually thought they had a chance. The Nashville Predators, almost out of nowhere, making it they were a high seed, but I can't remember correctly. I wasn't too much into the watching hockey YouTubers, watching their playoff predictions and stuff back then. But I would imagine it wasn't everybody picking the freaking Nashville Predators to go to the finals. I mean, they had a great team. They had that incredible top 4 with Yossi, Subban, Ekholm, and Ellis. They had obviously Pekka Rinne in the net. They had a lot of good players on their team. They were an absolute horse. And I mean, the Pittsburgh Penguins, that was going back to back. You had in the playoffs, you had Murray, then you went to Fleury, then you went back to Murray. I thought that was pretty sick. A pretty sick storyline. I mean, going back to back obviously is crazy. Really catapulting Sid into those top 10 conversations as a player. He's only 12 years into his career. I mean, I think McDavid's this is his 10th year. Yeah, this is 9th year of hockey. I mean, in 3 seasons, he's going to be in those top 10, ever conversations. Honestly, he's probably in there right now, but I mean, those really catapulted Sid into those top 10, top 5 players ever conversation, winning his 3rd Stanley Cup back-to-back, Patrick Hornquist's goal, really late in the third, the Carl Hagelin empty netter. You know, it was a 0-0 game 6. I mean, that's what you want in the Stanley Cup Finals. That was amazing hockey. Oh my God, what the hell? Yeah, like that was one of the first Stanley Cup Finals I remember being like when it was done, like, wow, that is peak hockey right there. And I mean, you know, maybe I'm hating a bit on the Penguins. You know, maybe they should be higher up, because they were actually one of the best teams, you know, I've ever seen put together with my own eyes. But at the same time, you know, I this is my personal opinion. If you disagree with it, I understand. You know, not everyone's gonna agree with a ranking. That's the point of ranking it. That's why you're watching the video. But I have the Penguins here coming in at number 4 for that 2017 Cup Final. So coming in at number 3, I have the 2022 Stanley Cup Finals. I think that was so incredible. It felt like it went to a Game 7, even though it didn't. Ended in 6. Nathan MacKinnon, Cale Makar, Mikko Rantanen should have just kept them together, you know what I'm saying? But we don't got to talk about that. You know, only in hindsight you tell whether it's a bad trade or not, the Mikko Rantanen trade. But I mean, that team, you know, if you don't remember, they got Nazem Kadri, obviously. They made that Kadri for Barrie trade. You know, everybody's talking about Kadri, you know, his, you know, Toronto choking in the first round every year. They trade for Tyson Barrie. They trade away Tyson Barrie, who was in some Norris conversations. You know, he's all just because of his point-producing ability. And they took a risk on getting Nazem Kadri, a second-line center. They also traded away Alex Kerfoot. And one of the best win trades for Colorado. It was really nice to see for them, you know what I'm saying? And then after that, I mean, you had the Tampa Bay Lightning going for a three-peat. And, you know, Gabriel Landeskog, his last, you know, outing before the big injury. You know, you had a lot of great storylines at Colorado. You know, I think they just got Devon Taves as well. Yeah, Tampa Bay obviously going for the three-peat. You know, I mean, honestly, Kucherov might have cemented himself as the best player of our generation if he won 3 Stanley Cups in a row. But McKinnon and Makar, I mean, that's when people really were like, wait, Cale Makar could honestly end his career, you know, in those top defenseman conversations. And, I mean, yeah, he's just gotten better from there. It's crazy to see how talented he is. But yeah, that was the most recent, you know, one of the more recent finals that I remember watching and being like, damn, like, I can't wait to watch more hockey, you know what I'm saying? Somebody commented on one of my recent videos, I say, you know what I'm saying, so much. I don't mean to. I think it's just because, like, it was like a joke, like, when I was growing up, about how much hockey players, you know, couldn't articulate their words and their vocabulary was a bit, you know, worse than a lot of regular people in the world. And they always, you know, football players as well, they always used to just be like, you know what I'm saying, you know what I'm saying, you know what I'm saying. Honestly, I think that's just where I picked it up from. But next up at number 2, we have the 2015 Stanley Cup Finals. So, I mean, this is a debate. I actually had them tied, but I was like, that's a cow answer. And before you say anything, you have to hear me out. You know, I was like, I think 8 or 9 years old, 10 years old. One of those, you know, that in that 2015 Cup Final. I think I was, let me do the math quick. I think I was 8, technically. So, yeah, an 8-year-old me is going to, you know, you guys already know what year is number 1 if you've been keeping track. An 8-year-old me is going to remember way less than, you know, however old I was when the number 1 Stanley Cup Final came out. You can do the math yourself. But, I mean, that finals was crazy. Obviously, the 2015 Chicago Blackhawks. You know, there's an argument whether they were the best in 2010. I'm assuming, you know, I think personally 2013 was probably their peak as a team. But 2015, you had one of the last runs for one of the best dynasties, and then you had the first run of many for one of the future greatest dynasties, and it was just an absolute battle. Like, classic example of like two of the 3 or 4 best teams in the NHL just facing off, going head to head. I still remember, that Lightning team, they had guys like Tyler Johnson breakout, Andre Palat. They had the Johnson, Palat, and Kucherov line before Braden Point joined them. They had like guys like Ryan Callahan, just like random ass players, bro. And the Chicago Blackhawks, I remember something happened, I think it was Dave Bowling. Somebody had like some sort of, I forget if it was like a cancer or something. Maybe I'm just waffling, but I feel like something like that happened. Like, I remember a storyline about that. I mean, they had Seabrook, Keith, Corey Crawford got another ring, you know what I'm saying? They had Marian Hossa, obviously. He was on his, final legs. Teuvo Teravainen, I forget if he was on that team. I think he just got traded. Obviously I can check it out. But I feel like he was on that team. And, I mean, it was just peak hockey. Maybe one of the best hockey forms of hockey I'll see in my life. As you can tell by my rankings, I hold a pretty high emphasis on the level of hockey I'm watching, how good the games are, not like how high scoring they are. Just like, you can tell when a hockey game is good, you can tell when two good teams are playing, you know what I'm saying? And that just, it's just more fun to watch, even if it's a 0-0 game. When two good teams are playing, you're more bound to your TV, you notice more small details. In a result, you enjoy what you're watching more. And I think that series was just, the epitome of just two great teams going head to head, battling it out. And in the end, the more experienced, probably the better team won. But if that loss didn't happen, who knows if the Lightning would have ever gained what they know and won those 2 championships. And then obviously there's one left, and that is the 2024 Stanley Cup Finals, which is coming in at number 1 for me. This was 4-3 to the Florida Panthers. The Oilers were down 3-0, and the Florida Panthers, blew a 3-0 lead, but they won Game 7. 1 goal was the difference in this series. No matter if you want to say the first 3 games were boring, whatever. Almost seeing a 3-0 comeback, watching the best player in the NHL put up 42 points in the playoffs, having, one of the greatest, let's be real, one of the greatest playoff runs in NHL history, even though they lost. Like, there's a reason he won the Conn Smythe over anyone on Florida. And, I mean, the Florida Panthers, they made the finals the year before. They got it done. The next year, against an even better team than they lost to in the finals. Obviously, they became a better team. But you just saw, how good this Florida Panthers team is. And, I mean, it was just peak hockey. It was excitement, especially from Games 4 to Game 7. It was fear. It was, I'm sure for Florida and Edmonton fans, it was a lot of different emotions. And, I mean, it was another case of the 2 best teams in the league, in my opinion, just going head to head. Or at least 2 of, the 3, 4, 5 best teams in the league. And ultimately it produced some of the greatest hockey we have ever watched with our own eyes. People who are not, a little bit older, people who have only watched, the hockey that I've watched from around like 2013 maybe, starting with the Blackhawks and Kings dynasty. This was this, in my opinion, maybe it's recency biased, but I like to think I'm not a recency biased person. I still think Wayne Gretzky's, probably going to be the GOAT. forever, unless, you know, like people say McDavid's already the greatest player of all time. That's some cap. He's the most skilled player. I think it's not even a question. He probably is the most skilled player. At the same time, he's not going to be the GOAT for a while. He has to do a lot. He has to win this cup this year. But, I mean, it was incredible watching this series, and you might say, well, you remember it the most, that's why you're saying it. That is not true. I mean, I'm sure you guys agree with me. You know, maybe it's an unpopular opinion, but I think last year was the best finals we've had. So now the last thing we are going to do for this episode is rank where we think the 2025 Stanley Cup Finals will rank amongst these 10 finalists. And honestly, I'm not even joking, bro. Number 1. You can't tell me, like, not only is okay, let's start with the champions, right? The Florida Panthers. They are better than last year. Obviously, they had Brandon Montour last year, you know, and they had Tarasenko, they had Kyle Okposo. This is obviously, you know, a little bit of a different team. At the same time, this is an incredible matchup because the Florida Panthers, they acquired, obviously, Brad Marchand, Seth Jones, who, in my opinion, make this team even better than last year. Obviously, you know, some of their stars aren't playing up to par, but, you know, when you have Barkov, Kachuk, Reinhart, and the refs on your side, and Gustav Forsling, you have Bob, who's won a championship, they have championship DNA, Brad Marchand brings championship DNA, Seth Jones, I mean, he may not have the championship, but this dude's a good player regardless. He's, you know, one of the top, you know, 20, 30, probably 20 defensemen in terms of pure talent. And, you know, the Florida, say what you want, they may not have a lot of talent, but they play well as a team, and it shows. You know, they are one of the greatest dynasties in the NHL. Not, you know, maybe not in the top 10, but one of them. There's no way they're not. Like, they made 3 straight Stanley Cup Finals. They won a President's Trophy before that. It's one of the greatest 4-year teams we've seen. We'll look back in history and say that. It's just hard to say that right now because we're experiencing it in real time. But you know what? I'm going to say it. This is number 1 because then you look at the Edmonton Oilers. I think this is a better Oilers team than last year. Obviously, they're hungrier. It's unfortunate what happened to Zach Hyman. You know, was it rigged by the NHL for Zach Hyman to get injured so Florida can get their dynasty? You know, no tax, all of that stuff. You know, the ref's favorite team, Gary Bettman's second favorite team. You know, obviously he wants them to win. Let's be real. Edmonton's not winning if Gary Bettman's the commissioner. But at the same time, you just got to do what you can. And, you know, even if you're playing without Zach Hyman, Corey Perry's been arguably more impactful in the playoffs. Going to be tough for the Oilers to win. I'm not going to lie. They're like, I think Florida's just so much better, especially when Zach Hyman's out. But you gotta do what you gotta do. I don't think it's impossible for the Oilers to win. They were 1 goal away last year. They're a better team this year. Doesn't matter if Florida's a better team this year. Like, the fact that the Oilers are just so nasty, the fact that they're a better team than they were last year is outrageous. So, and I mean, you're more motivated. You know how to deal with these nerves. You know how to deal with the pressure. And, I mean, let's not underlook. The Edmonton Oilers picked up, I mean, Trent Frederick hasn't done jack shit. But, I mean, Trent Frederick is a guy you would want on your team in these kind of moments. And then also, they picked up Jake Wallman, John Klingberg, like, the Jeff Skinner and Arvidsson in the offseason. What did Florida do in the offseason? You know, they lost Montour and everything. They made up for it at the trade deadline. But this Oilers team is very much better. Hopefully, you know, if miraculously Zach Hyman can make a comeback. You know, hopefully miraculously the refs don't, you know, play for their team in Florida. But it's going to be a great series. And then obviously, I think the last storyline, other than the Edmonton goaltending, is Connor McDavid. I think, McDavid and Draisaitl. Draisaitl's obviously already the greatest German player to ever play. McDavid, probably, one of the top 10 players to ever play the game already, which is absolutely devious. But, I'm sure Wayne Gretzky was in a similar position when he played. Like, he definitely was in the upper echelon already, when he was McDavid's age. But, I mean, the greats have lost before. Gretzky, Mark Messier, Crosby. I'm sure there's other examples of a team losing in the finals and then winning the next year. But, it's just interesting. I don't know, like, beating the exact same team next year, is the script going to write itself 3 times in a row? Gary Bettman is the commissioner. I feel like a lot of people are missing out on that. There's no way he's going to let a Canadian team win. Like, I'm not even being salty. He just literally knows how to do business, and he knows that the American teams make more. He knows that Florida is a place with no tax, and he wants them to win, so he doesn't have to pay taxes for his business. And I'm joking, but, like, you know what I mean? I'm 10% serious, but at the same time, like, a Canadian team hasn't won in 32 years. I don't know why we should expect different.